Warning. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Pennsylvania, 1984. One of the oldest cold cases in the state. Finally cracked. And the man they arrested, nobody saw it coming. Here's what that title actually means. A 25-year-old woman was murdered inside a locked restaurant after midnight, alone, beaten, strangled, stabbed through the throat. Then a bag pulled over her head. And for 15 years, the day manager shows up to open for breakfast. Every door is still locked. From the inside, he steps in, and he freezes. On the kitchen floor, a young woman, face up, still in her winter coat. Her name was Terry Lynn Brooks, 25 years old, the night manager, and she was never supposed to die like this. Praise. If a case like this grips you, hit subscribe on Crime Watch Hub. We dig up the stories that got buried under the wrong answer. Now, let's keep going. Pennsylvania, 1984. One of the oldest cold cases in the state, solved 15 years too late, and the arrest stunned an entire community. Here's what that means. Start with a locked door. February 4th, 1984. Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. A Roy Rogers restaurant on Lincoln Highway. Morning shift. The day manager arrives to open. He reaches for the door. It's still locked. From the inside. Nothing about that is alarming. Not yet. A locked restaurant in the morning is normal. He lets himself in. Same as always. And then the morning stops being normal. On the kitchen floor, a young woman, face up, still in her coat. She's the night manager. Her name is Terry Brooks, 25 years old, and she is gone. Now, put yourself in that room, not as a viewer, as a cop, because the first officers on scene, they don't see a story. They see a checklist. And the checklist points one direction. Look at the counter. The safe is open, standing wide open. The night's cash, missing. Look at the drive-through window, cracked, left open, just a few inches. Now look at every other door, locked, every single one. Front doors, side doors, all secure. So walk the logic with them. Money's gone, safe is open. One window left unlatched on the way out. Everything else sealed tight behind the killer. To a detective walking in cold, this reads like a robbery, a hold-up after closing, a stranger, someone who wanted the cash and went too far to get it. And here's the thing, that wasn't a lazy conclusion. It was a reasonable one. The restaurant had been robbed before, a woman closing alone, late at night, an open safe and missing money. Every box a robbery checks was checked. So within the first hour, the theory was set. Robbery gone wrong. And once a theory sets that early, it doesn't just guide the case, it starts to run it. This is the part people miss about investigations. The first read of a scene is powerful. It decides which questions get asked. It decides which leads get chased. And it decides which ones get ignored. Every detective who walked that kitchen was now looking for a stranger, a man who wanted money. That's the lane they were in, and the whole investigation followed. But here's where it gets complicated. Because the scene told one story, and Terry Brooks told another. I'm not going to walk you through every detail, not here, not yet. But you need to understand one thing now. A robbery is fast. A robbery is efficient. You want the money. You take it. You leave. The violence, if there is any, has a purpose. Get the cash. Get out. That is not what happened to Terry. What happened to her went far beyond a robbery. Far beyond what taking money requires. She had been beaten, strangled, stabbed, and she had clearly fought back. This wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the work of someone who just wanted what was in the safe. And that's the contradiction sitting at the center of this case. The money said one thing. Her injuries said something completely different. But in that first hour, nobody stopped to weigh the two against each other. The open safe was louder. The missing cash was simpler. So the robbery theory won. And it would keep winning for the next 15 years. Everything about that kitchen said robbery. Everything about her body said something else. Before we go further, this channel exists to rebuild cold cases from the evidence up, not the headline down. That difference is the entire reason this case got solved. So subscribe to Crime Watch Hub right now. And be here when the wrong answer falls apart. Because in the next chapter, we look at exactly what the scene was hiding. Ask a robber what they want. The answer is simple. Money. Get in. Take the cash. Get out. Speed is everything. Now hold that idea against this scene. Because the more investigators studied Terry's injuries, the less the robbery theory made sense. A robbery is about efficiency. What happened to Terry was the opposite. The force used on her was extreme, far more than moving cash ever requires. Think about it plainly. If the goal is an open safe, why the level of violence found here? Why go so far beyond the money? That's the question the scene refused to answer. A stranger after cash has no reason to attack someone like this. It's not efficient. It has no payoff. It only makes sense if it was personal. But in 1984, nobody framed it that way. The safe was open. The cash was gone. And that was easier to explain. So let's step away from the theory for a moment and look at who Terry Brooks actually was. Not the victim on a report. The person, built from the record. Terry was 25 years old, and she was sharp. She graduated cum laude from the University of Maryland. Her degree was in behavioral science. That degree could have taken her anywhere. She'd planned on a career in human resources, a clear professional path. But somewhere along the way, she changed course. She discovered she loved the restaurant business, the pace of it, the pressure, the people. So she made a choice. She stepped off the expected path and built her own. By 1984, that choice was paying off. She was the night manager at Roy Rogers, recently promoted, trusted with the close, trusted with the safe, the staff, the building. She was also engaged. There was a wedding on the horizon, a future taking shape. None of that is sentiment. It's the record. A driven woman, in charge, moving forward. That's who was on that kitchen floor. Now back to the evidence. Because Terry didn't just leave behind a scene, she left behind proof. Investigators recovered fingerprints from that restaurant. Around 15 of them. They ran those prints everywhere they could. Every law enforcement database available. And the result? Nothing. Not a single match. Whoever left them wasn't in any system. That was a wall. But not the important one. Because the most critical evidence wasn't on a counter or a door frame. It was on Terry herself. Under her fingernails, investigators recovered skin tissue. Not hers. Someone else's. Now think about what that means. Skin under the nails doesn't get there by accident. It gets there because she fought. Because she reached for the person attacking her and took part of him with her. That single detail should have reframed everything. You don't fight a safe. You fight a person. And she fought hard enough to mark him. In that moment, Terry did something remarkable. Without knowing it, she collected evidence. She secured a piece of her attacker and held it as she died. Here's the reason this case grips people. We rebuild these stories from the evidence out, not from the theory police started with. If that's the kind of true crime you want, subscribe to Crime Watch Hub and stay with us. Because this next part is where 1984 fails her. Investigators had the skin. They had the fingerprints. They had physical proof she fought back. There was just one problem. The year. In 1984, DNA testing as we know it did not exist. The technology simply wasn't there yet. So they were holding a suspect's identity. with no way to read it. The answer was in their hands, and the tools to unlock it were years away. But here's what the department did right. They didn't discard that evidence. They didn't lose it to time. They preserved it. The skin tissue was carefully stored, bagged, labeled, and locked away, placed in an evidence locker to wait. At the time, it must have felt like a dead end, evidence with no way to use it. But preservation was everything. Because a defensive sample like that is a name waiting for the technology to catch up. It doesn't expire the way a memory does. It doesn't change its story like a witness. It just sits there, patient, exact, holding the truth until someone can finally read it. And that's the quiet turning point of this entire case. Not a lead, not a witness. A small, preserved sample in a locker. She'd left them the answer in 1984. It would take 15 years to learn how to read it. A theory is only as strong as the next case. And 2 weeks after Terry died, another case landed. At a different Roy Rogers nearby, a woman was attacked while closing alone. She was an assistant manager, and she survived. For investigators, the parallels were impossible to ignore. A woman, working late, closing by herself, attacked after the doors were locked. It looked like the same hand. Then it happened again. About a week later, further out, a lone woman at another restaurant was attacked. That one did not end the same way. Now put yourself back in that investigation. 3 incidents, 3 women, all working alone, all after hours. To any detective, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And a pattern needs a hunter. So the theory grew. Not just a robber anymore. A predator. Targeting women who closed alone. Police chased it hard. They pulled fingerprints from the other cases. They compared, cross-checked, and followed every thread. The serial theory took over the room. But here's the turn. Those other attacks? They were eventually traced to other people. Both were found to be unrelated to Terry. Different cases, different hands. They only looked connected on the surface. And that's the trap. Because by the time police knew that, the damage was already done. For weeks, the investigation had aimed outward, at strangers, at predators, at a pattern. Every resource pointed away from Terry's own life, and that direction hardened into fact. This is how good detectives get pulled off course, not through laziness, through a theory that feels reasonable, a pattern that fits just well enough. They call it confirmation bias. Once you believe in a stranger, you start reading every clue to match. Evidence that fits gets attention. Evidence that doesn't gets explained away. And the personal angle? The idea that this was someone close to her? It never got room to breathe. Which brings us to a man interviewed early, Terry's fiancé. He was spoken to, as anyone close would be. Routine, at the time. He told police he wasn't at the restaurant that night. He said he had an early shift the next morning. And the people around Terry backed the picture. Her family described him as devoted, loving, attentive, invested in their future. So, with an alibi and no reason to dig, the door on him quietly closed. He wasn't a suspect. He was the grieving fiancé. And the case rolled on, toward the stranger it was already chasing. But strangers, in this case, led nowhere. The fingerprints matched no one. The serial theory had collapsed. Every outward lead ran dry. And slowly, the file went cold. Now watch what 15 years does to a case. The leads stop coming, the tips fade, the investigators move to new files. The Roy Rogers, where Terry worked, eventually closed its doors for good. The building moved on. The intersection moved on. And the physical evidence? It stayed exactly where they'd left it. Preserved, locked, waiting, untouched by the technology it needed. But one person never moved on. Terry's mother, Betty. She had sat with the robbery theory for years, and something about it never fit her. She didn't buy that a stranger did this, not the way it happened. She didn't launch a campaign. She didn't fight the department publicly. She simply carried a doubt, quiet, private, and unshakable. A mother's instinct, sitting in the exact spot the investigation refused to look. This is why cold cases matter to this channel, because unsolved almost never means no evidence. It usually means the right question went years without being asked. That's the gap we exist to close. Subscribe to Crime Watch Hub and follow these cases with us. Because for a decade and a half, that gap held this case shut. The evidence sat ready, the doubt sat waiting, and nobody with power connected the two. For 15 years, the file sat closed. In 1998, one new police chief decided that wasn't good enough. By 1998, the science had changed. DNA testing had leapt forward. Cases once called unsolvable were breaking open across the country. And a new Falls Township police chief noticed. His name was Arnold Connellan. He looked at the Terry Brooks file, 14 years cold, untouched. But he knew something the original team couldn't. The evidence in that locker could finally be tested. So he made a decision. He reopened the case. And then he did something unusual. He didn't just hand it back to his own detectives. He took it to a group in Philadelphia. A group built for exactly this. They call themselves the Vidocq Society. Retired detectives, forensic experts, profilers, people who spent careers solving violent crime and weren't ready to stop. Their method is simple and strange. They meet once a month over lunch. They take a single cold case, and they pick it apart, together. Falls Township brought them Terry's case, laid out the whole file. 14 years of dead ends, built on the robbery theory. And one man in that room stood up, a forensic psychologist named Richard Walter. Walter is considered a founding figure in criminal profiling. He'd examined countless crime scenes, and he listened to the entire presentation. Then he told them something blunt. They had been investigating the wrong crime. This was never a robbery, he said. And his reasoning was pure logic. A robber is efficient. A robber wants the money and an exit. The violence in this case went far past that. It was excessive. It was personal. So the staged scene? The open safe? The missing cash? Walter read it as misdirection, a cover, not a motive. The real driver, he argued, was rage, and rage like that has a source. It comes from someone who knew her, someone close enough to feel rejected. This is the power of behavioral profiling. It doesn't replace physical evidence. It tells you where to point it. Walter's message to the detectives was direct. Stop chasing strangers. Go back to the people closest to Terry, especially anyone she may have been pushing away. In a single afternoon, the theory that ran this case for years was turned completely around. So investigators went back to the beginning, and they asked her parents a basic question. Was there ever a boyfriend? Her parents remembered one. They thought his name was something like O'Keefe, so detectives went looking. They searched arrest records. They searched old newspapers. They searched for any O'Keefe connected to Terry, and they came up with nothing. Then they checked one more source, Terry's funeral guest book, the registrar signed by mourners in 1984. And there was the name, not O'Keefe, Alfred Scott Keefe. He hadn't hidden. He'd signed his own name at her funeral. The lead had been sitting in plain sight for years. Now the case had a direction. But a name isn't proof. They needed to connect him to the evidence in that locker. Here's where the investigation gets sharp. They couldn't just demand his DNA, not without tipping him off. So they used a method that's fully legal. Abandoned DNA. Anything you discard in public, you leave your genetic material behind, and you give up your claim to it. Keefe was a smoker. Investigators watched and waited. and they collected the cigarette butts he threw away. No warrant needed for trash left behind. No confrontation. No warning. Just patient, quiet collection. Then the lab went to work. They pulled DNA from the saliva on those butts, and they compared it to the skin preserved under Terry's fingernails. 14 years that sample had waited, bagged and locked, exactly as left. Now the technology had finally caught up, and the two profiles were compared. They matched. The skin Terry secured as she fought belonged to Alfred Scott Keefe. This is why we cover cold cases the slow way, because a case doesn't turn on drama. It turns on a preserved sample and a legal method. If that's the true crime you respect, subscribe to Crime Watch Hub and see it through with us. The DNA put him at the center of it. Now they needed him to explain why. 15 years and 1 day. That's how long he had. February 5, 1999. Alfred Scott Keefe was brought in for questioning. He was 37 now, living quietly, drawing no attention. And he arrived with a story he'd told before. He wasn't at the restaurant that night. He had an early shift the next morning. He knew nothing about what happened. The same account, word for word. For 15 years, that story had held. Then investigators laid down the DNA, the skin, the cigarette butts, the match, and a story rehearsed for a decade and a half started to come apart. At first, he only slipped. He said he didn't mean for it to happen, then pulled back fast and denied it. Detectives didn't push. They let the silence work. And piece by piece, his account moved, each version drifting closer to the truth. Then he said one line that ended it. He claimed she came at him first. It seemed small, but for the first time in 15 years, he had placed himself inside that restaurant. After that, there was nowhere left to stand. So here is what he told them. Not theory, his own account. He went to the restaurant that night on purpose. Terry had grown distant. He believed she wanted to end things. He went to confront her after closing, and she let him in through the locked door. That single fact solved an old mystery, the one that puzzled the first investigators. No forced entry, no broken locks. Because she knew the person at the door. Inside, they argued, and Terry told him plainly, the engagement was over. She was not going to marry him. He said he loved her. He said he couldn't accept it. And in that moment, he made a choice that would define the next 15 years. But it's what he did after that reveals the mind behind this case. Because Keefe didn't just leave. He went to work on the scene. He took the cash. He opened the drive-through window. He left every other door locked. He built a robbery that never happened. The staging Richard Walter had called misdirection was exactly that. A story constructed to send police outward. And for 15 years, it worked. Now here is the coldest fact in this entire case. The next morning, he drove to her family's home. Not out of grief. By his own account, it was calculated. He went there to place himself in the center of the family's shock. To be seen as the devoted fiancé. To sit above suspicion, in plain view. That performance is the reason he stayed free. Not luck. Not a lack of evidence. A role he played the morning after. But a role only lasts so long. And the evidence never changed its story. Keefe was charged with first-degree murder and robbery. The Bucks County District Attorney, Alan Rubenstein, called it one of the most brutal cases he'd seen. Prosecutors moved to seek the death penalty. In 2000, Keefe made a decision. He pleaded guilty, avoiding a trial, avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison, no parole, ever. And one person felt the weight of it differently. Terry's mother, Betty. For 15 years, she'd held a private doubt. She never believed the robbery story. Now she had her answer. Her instinct had been right the entire time. But step back from the confession for a moment, because a confession isn't what cracked this case. The truth was never actually lost. It sat in an evidence locker the whole time, skin that Terry secured with her own hands, in the last moments she was able to. She couldn't have known what she'd done, but she left investigators a name. They just needed the science to read it, and the people willing to look again. A chief who reopened a closed file, a room of experts who reframed the crime, a mother who never stopped doubting. They're the reason that evidence finally spoke. Terry kept that evidence safe for 15 years, so it could finally speak. The least we can do is keep listening. Subscribe to Crime Watch Hub, because somewhere there's another locker, another name waiting, and we're not done opening them.